Time to bring home the bacon on NES Works Gaiden episode 43. Super Mario Bros. Has landed, and it changes everything. Or at least it will eventually. Obviously, Nintendo's big hit would need time for its influence to spread across the industry and reinvent game design. You certainly can't expect games released immediately in its wake to reflect the future of Famicom software. And naturally, the next piece of software to arrive on the console, Pooyan, offers nothing more ambitious than a home port of a minor 1982 arcade hit. However, this arcade conversion happens to hail from the double team of Konami and Hudson. As early Famicom software goes, you could hardly ask for a better combo, short of a Namco-Nintendo collaboration. That never happened, but this did. A backward echo of history that hints at the Konami-Hudson merger that would take place 20 years down the line. This, of course, is simply a coincidence, and I don't actually know why Hudson took up publishing duties on this release, which appears to have been developed by Konami, a company that had already established its Famicom publishing bona fides. Hudson also published the MSX port of Pooyan, so I'm sure they worked out some sort of multi-platform deal. Not that it matters. The important thing is that the two companies collectively put together a fine adaptation of the game for Famicom. It's simple but challenging, and its mechanics make maximal use of a modest set of items. Pooyan wrestles the story of the three little pigs into a goofy little slice of video gaming whimsy, in which a mother pig attempts to rescue and protect her piglets from a marauding band of wolves. For some reason, this setup involves a winch and pulley system, ballooning, umbrellas, and a Sisyphean boulder. The whole thing has a feel reminiscent of a certain 1930s Disney cartoon, which probably didn't happen by coincidence.
Open the door and let me in!
The man behind the original version of Pooyan was none other than Tokuro Fujiwara. Fujiwara's name should be familiar to NES Works viewers, given that the work he performed for Capcom after leaving Konami shortly after completing Pooyan and Rock 'n' Rope has been the basis of some of the NES's most beloved games: Commando, Bionic Commando, Ghosts N Goblins, and Mega Man. Fujiwara's arcade work tended to have a distinctively cartoonish vibe to it, rounded and detailed. All of this would eventually come to a head when he worked as producer on most of the NES Disney games that Capcom created in the wake of Mickey Mousecapade. Of course, Fujiwara had nothing to do with Mickey Mousecapade itself, because that game was created by Hudson. Yeah, it's a small world after all. As for Pooyan, it's honestly a much zanier game than anything that would emerge from the Capcom Disney team-up. You control Mama Pig as she defends her kids against a seemingly endless parade of wolves. The entire game takes place on a single screen, and Mama Pig herself can only move up and down along a pulley system at the right side of the screen. She rises and descends with her back against a cliff wall, atop which her kids sit in relative safety. Relative being the operative word here. Dozens of wolves leap into the fray one by one, and every wolf that manages to slip past Mama's defenses manages to climb partway up the cliff wall. Each wolf makes it a little higher than the last, and letting 4 of them through spells the end of the game. Mama happens to be a great archer, though. She can fire off a rapid stream of arrows at the wolves. Herein you'll find the core gameplay loop. The wolves leap from the platform at the top of the screen, drifting safely downward attached to balloons, and Mama can put an end to their ravenous ambitions by placing an arrow through each wolf's balloon. Pop a balloon, and the attached wolf plunges to its death. Miss, however, and that wolf lands safely and makes its way up the wall. Once you've taken out a set number of wolves and cleared out the entire pack, your kids are safe, at least until the next round begins. Note that simply loosing a flurry of arrows does not guarantee success. Each wolf appears to be armed with a saber of some sort, which they use to defend their bodies against Mama's projectiles. You need to strike a balloon square in the center in order to defeat a wolf. Otherwise, the creature will simply deflect your arrow. A deflected arrow can still come in handy, however. If a wolf happens to block an arrow, your bolt will drop downward head first. The tip of the arrow can still puncture a balloon that it strikes on the way down. You can't really count on friendly fire to save the day every time, though, so you're really better off just aiming carefully and making every shot count. That can be tricky once the wolves start firing back at you. They attempt to knock Mama off her perch by tossing rocks, which, unlike her arrows, have a sort of lazy arc to them that makes judging their flight path a little tricky. Thankfully, rocks have to hit Mama dead on in order to knock her down. If they strike her platform or the umbrella over her head, they'll rebound harmlessly. Even so, you need to evade these lupine attacks while trying to line up your shots and lead your aim against the plummeting balloons. Once you complete the first round, the action reverses itself. Rather than use the balloons as de facto parachutes, the wolves now use them to make their way to the top of the screen. Rising balloons prove to be a little hardier than the falling ones, and you need to hit each balloon in round 2 multiple times in order to drop its rider back down to the ground. This is especially true of the purple wolves, who are about as close as this game comes to introducing a boss. Not only do their swiftly ascending balloons take several direct hits to destroy, the wolves themselves are uncannily good at knocking Mama's arrows aside. If a boss wolf reaches the top of the screen, it adds 5 more wolves to the level total that you have to defeat. Worse than that, it adds another set of muscles to the enormous boulder at the top of the screen. The wolves in round 2 have their sights set at the top for a reason. They want to team up and shove that rock over the edge and onto Mama's head. Each wolf who reaches the overhead platform helps push the boulder a little further to the right, and eventually they'll send it plummeting to smash up Mama's pulley platform. The game continues in this alternating loop, ramping up the number of wolves and the durability of their balloons while tossing in the occasional bonus level. Bonus stages arm you with chunks of meat that fly in a lazy arc and can take out multiple balloons in a single shot. The morality of a pig launching a hawk of beef in order to avoid being turned into a hawk of ham is quite the existential humdinger if you stop to think about it. Kind of like the question of why Mickey Mouse can hang out with Goofy the dog but also make a pet of Pluto the dog. Yet another Disney parallel in Fujiwara's work. While hardly life-changing, Pooyan offers a good deal of variety and considerable challenge on Famicom. Sure, it looks a little dated, coming right on the heels of Super Mario Bros., but there's nothing wrong with a good, solid arcade conversion every now and then. Speaking of good, solid arcade conversions, Jaleco's City Connection arrives hot on the heels of Pooyan. We've seen this one already on NES Works, but its belated 1988 arrival did it no real favors. Here, in its original Japanese context of September 1985, however, it shines far more brightly. The Famicom release of City Connection plays and looks and sounds almost exactly identical to the NES adaptation. Jaleco tweaked some of the interstitial graphics for the American release, changing out cute-as-a-button mascot driver Clarice in favor of some blonde dude. But otherwise, this version works just like the American cart. Playing it in its original incarnation, I get the impression that City Connection was meant to have crossover appeal to draw in that most elusive of arcade-going demographics: women. Between the pastel colors, the whimsical music, the presence of a cute lady protagonist whom the game makes no effort to sexualize, and the fact that you drive around in an iconic Honda City from which the game takes its name, City Connection has the same general vibe as other notable female-friendly hits like Centipede and Ms. Pac-Man. Mechanically, City Connection owes a great deal to other character-driven infinite-scroll platform titles like Namco's Mappy and Sega's Flicky. I originally covered City Connection for NES before having made my way through the SG-1000 library, but having emerged on the other side of that journey, yeah, this game really wants to be Flicky. Like Flicky, it even forces you to deal with a cat who is a total asshole, randomly popping up in the middle of your path and easily accounting for 75% of your collisions. The cops that attempt to pursue Clarice and put a stop to her crime of driving along the highway at a moderate speed have nothing on that stupid cat who just pops up in the middle of the roadway unexpectedly and plays the flea waltz when you smash into it, a tune whose title in Japanese translates to "I stepped on the cat," and deservedly so. City Connection consists of a series of 4-tier highways set in major cities across the world, and your task is simply to drive every meter of those highways in your adorable little Honda City. Impressively, for such a diminutive car, it can leap, change directions in midair, and fire oil cans as projectiles. The jumping mechanic takes a little getting used to, as you have to account for a brief delay between pressing the jump button and actually taking to the air. But once you have the feel of the action, you can make Clarice's city do remarkable things. Similarly to something like Pac-Man, you never stop moving in this game, so you always need to be on your toes in order to evade the cops, or knock them into a spin-out with a well-aimed oil can. And of course, avoid that stupid cat. Cover every meter of highway and it's on to the next scenic vista. Or you can collect 3 balloons to warp ahead to another location. It's all simple enough, but City Connection maintains a brisk pace and a decent but not overwhelming challenge level, which makes it a real standout in the 1985 Famicom lineup. And despite being a game about cars and cops, it's somehow the Famicom title to this point that best embodies that all-important principle of kawaii. And finally, Konami self-publishes an excuse to do something with that weirdo 2-button controller you bought with Hyper Olympics. It's Hyper Sports, the sequel. I suppose there's something to be said for Konami making the effort to give kids something to do with such an extremely limited peripheral. The Hypershot Controller that came bundled with the earlier arcade sports conversion consisted of nothing but 2 daisy-chained boxes, with 2 buttons apiece. No D-pad, no selection buttons, nothing. This means that the controller literally has no use except as a Hyper Olympics interface. Hyper Sports doubles the number of events you can play with the Hypershot, with 4 new events. Although if your Hypershot is wearing out with age and suffering from sticky and unresponsive buttons the way mine is, you'll probably never see all 4 of these events in person. Incidentally, the standard hardwired Famicom controllers don't work for Hypersports. Although you need to use them to navigate the main menu's player and difficulty selections, the events themselves require the Hypershots buttons. You therefore control all 4 events with simple button presses. If this seems like it would make for an unreasonably limited game, well, yes, even Konami agreed. They would bundle the events from this cartridge together with those from Hyper Olympics for the NES release Track and Field, making for a considerably more complete package. Here though, it's basically half a dang game. But that seems to be par for the course with this line of sports-themed minigame collections. Well, a la Epyx's Winter and Summer Games, or Skate or Die. Just a handful of simplistic events that you can clear in about 5 minutes. Clearly these games had their fans, given how many of these existed and how well they sold. No judgments. They were just beginning to outlaw leaded gas in the early 80s after all. The first event in Hypersports, skeet shooting, looks like a complicated target shooting challenge. It is not. Although you have 2 targeting reticles with which to hit targets that fly in from both sides of the screen, you don't need to aim. When a skeet disc flies into the same vertical column of pixels as a reticle, your little gun guy will instantly and automatically adjust his aim to draw a bead on the disc, like the Doom guy. You only have a frame or 2 in which to fire, so this game demands quick reflexes and a good sense of rhythm. If you do well enough, you'll eventually see special colored skeets that fly extra fast and will make you feel good about yourself if you can hit them. In the triple jump, you run for a short distance, then leap. Then, you leap 2 more times. That's all right there in the name. Archery is kind of like skeet shooting from a top-down instead of first-person view. A target moves up and down along the right side of the screen, and you need to press the Hypershot button to loose an arrow at it, taking into account the target's motion and the wind direction indicator. It's fine, I suppose, but it's no Pooyan. Personally, if I were Konami, I'd have given Hypersports to Hudson and self-publish Pooyan, but what do I know? And finally, the high jump, which works a lot like the triple jump event, except that instead of jumping 3 times consecutively, you just jump once, but really high. You need to time your jump in order to leap from an ideal spot and an optical angle, or else you'll knock the bar loose and foul. It's a very particular event that demands a lot of precision, which I suppose is meant to make up for the fact that it's mind-deadeningly simplistic, which really is the general ethos at work here in this entire package. Dumb, but difficult. Each minigame requires you to hit some sort of qualifying score in order to advance to the next event. If you fail, the game ends, and since you don't get to choose the event order, that means you'll spend a disproportionate amount of time in the skeet shoot mode. These events fare a lot better in the context of the NES game, just because there are so many more of them to play that it feels like a proper release, as opposed to a pricey fragment of a game. But people really seem to love this franchise regardless of the version, so perhaps I'm simply out of touch. No, it's the children who are wrong. Next time on NES Works Gaiden, 2 steps forward, 1 step off a cliff of despair.